Feedback is not like pizza. When pizza is bad, it's still pretty good. Feedback is like a prawn. When it's bad, it's very bad. And this is why managers shy away from giving feedback, because they don't want to deal with their team like a bad prawn. I'm going to talk through the 12 tips for providing feedback. I'll also explain the context around why some efforts to provide feedback fall flat. The red line is when you have your team wary of you, whereas the green line is when people are willing to change. Be credible. Who is this feedback coming from? Empathy. Seek first to understand. No surprises. Give bite-sized pieces often. You are not the problem is the problem. If the thought of providing feedback is something that you dread, then you won't want to miss this episode. Welcome to Lead to Grow, the podcast that decodes how human success drives business performance with the people principle. I'm your host, Tommy Sim, and today we're going to explore the topic of feedback, how to avoid the many traps that go along with giving feedback, and how to ensure your message lands without the collateral damage. Now, there is a word that starts with F and ends in CK that's often considered dirty, which is feedback. I've got some feedback for you. I would like your feedback. What was their feedback? It can often strike fear into the best of us. But why is that? Isn't feedback a good thing? Well, feedback is not like pizza. When pizza is bad, it's still pretty good. Feedback is like a prawn. When it's bad, it's very bad. And this is why managers shy away from giving feedback, because they don't want to deal with their team like a bad prawn. But what if you had the ability to give regular feedback to your team that didn't make them sick? Wouldn't that be good? In today's episode of Lead to Grow, I'm going to talk through the 12 tips for providing feedback that will not only help you execute feedback more effectively, I'll also explain the context around why some efforts to provide feedback fall flat. If the thought of providing feedback is something that you dread, then you won't want to miss this episode. Before we get into it, there is one concept that is important to state first. Feedback from leaders is not about simply telling someone what you think. Let's leave that to Gordon Ramsay. Feedback as a leader is about changing behavior. You only get a sustainable change in behavior if that person is willing to change. You can gain coercion, but then this requires a coercive tactic to be present all the time. This could be you watching over them or some sort of punishment. However, this results in people doing the right thing only when you're watching and only doing just enough to avoid punishment. It also requires more work from you as a leader to enforce the behavior. Let's think of that as the red line and the green line. The red line is when you have your team wary of you and scared of what might happen next. This is when you can change behavior through gaining coercion only. Whereas the green line is when people are willing to change. They're open to discussing how they can improve and ultimately engaged in what they are doing. The final thing before we start, you need to ask yourself an important question. Am I suited to leading people? If the answer is no, that's okay. But if your answer is yes when it's really no, then your life will be more stressful than it needs to be. How do you know? If you feel energized after listening to this episode, the answer is probably yes. I am suited to leading people. But if you feel exhausted after hearing these tips and it seems like too much work, then it might be better if you're a technical leader rather than a people leader. So here they are, the 12 tips for leaders providing feedback. Number 1, be credible. Who is this feedback coming from? There is a legendary basketball figure in the NBA named Greg Popovich, who was a long-standing coach of the San Antonio Spurs. He's known for being a no-nonsense person, often putting journalists in their place when they make incorrect statements or ask questions trying to bait him into a controversial answer. Conversely, there is a person named LeVar Ball. His fame comes from the fact that he has 3 sons, of which 2 of them are prominent NBA players, and the other one is a successful hip-hop artist. While he has many accomplishments, he's most famous for being the quintessential loudmouth parent who often enjoys giving his opinion whenever anyone wants to listen, and even when they don't. LeVar's eldest son, Lonzo Ball, he once played for the Los Angeles Lakers, and the coach at the time was Luke Walton. Now, LeVar had some very pointed feedback for Luke, particularly in terms of how he was playing his son. LeVar leveled out some harsh criticism to Luke, and he also had some specific areas that he thought weren't helping. Below is part of what he said. Luke Walton turned him, Lonzo, into a loser's mentality of, oh, he's young, he'll get it, instead of letting him go out there and just letting him do what he does. Take him out of fourth quarters, not letting him start the quarters. In response, Greg Popovich had the following to say: whenever anyone says anything about another individual or about the quality of another individual or what they're doing, I think the first thing to look at is the substance and gravitas of the source that speaks. Just stopping at that point would tell you that you don't need to listen or go any further. Just another fan in the peanut gallery with an opinion, which is meaningless. Ouch. He doesn't mince words, old Greg. The conclusion drawn by Coach Pop is to not listen to anything that LeVar Ball has to say, regardless of what it is. It's not because the feedback wasn't right, it's because of who it was coming from. The problem with this is that accurate feedback is still accurate no matter where it comes from. Or as the saying goes, even good advice from a hypocrite is still good advice. However, it's a natural instinct to want to reject feedback if we aren't comfortable with the source. Therefore, one of the most important parts of a person receiving feedback is where that feedback is coming from. Earlier in my career, I had business owners who wanted me to provide constructive feedback to some of their team members because they felt that I would deliver it in a better way than what they would. My answer to this request was always to politely decline. It didn't matter how well I delivered the message. The response would always be the same. Who is this guy and what the hell does he know about what I should or shouldn't be doing? So it is important not to come in with a whole lot of criticism before it is established that you are in a position to provide feedback. The criticism may be warranted and needed, but it's not going to be effective in changing behaviour if it results in people camping out on the red line. Number 2, empathy. Seek first to understand. Let's say that you have the credibility in which to provide feedback. You're across what is taking place with the team, what people are doing, and what they're not doing so well. Are you now in a great place to let people know what they're doing wrong? Well, there's one piece of information that is important for you to know. Let's take a sidestep for a moment. You're now in a sales role. You work for a great company with a fantastic product. Sitting in front of you is a prospect, and your job is now to sell to this person in front of you. How do you start the meeting? What do you focus on? If you were to go back 20 or 30 years, the common response may have been to talk about the features and benefits. Sell me this pen, asked Jordan Belfort, and most people look at the pen and describe the positive things about the pen without considering who they are selling to. As some of you may know, selling to an individual who sits in front of you these days is not about spouting generic features and benefits. It's about asking good questions to learn more about them, getting an understanding of their perspective, and empathizing with where they're coming from. It also helps to give context to what you're wanting to talk about. No matter how good your pen is, if you aren't displaying empathy, your prospect is less likely to feel understood and therefore be more inclined to be defensive. Now let's make our way back to giving feedback to one of your team members. To properly understand a situation and to frame your message effectively, you need to ask questions and learn more about what is happening for the other person. Ask questions to not only gain information, but so that you can demonstrate that you've understood what was going on for the other person in their situation. Showing empathy and understanding doesn't mean you agree with what they did. It helps you to see why they did what they did. Now, once you've established an understanding of their perspective, it helps to summarize what you've understood in a non-judgmental way. This establishes that we are now on the same page with the same information. People are far more willing to hear what you have to say once you've done so. But it has to be authentic, so you can genuinely provide feedback from a position of helping. If you've not shown empathy, the other person is likely to not feel safe, and therefore their mind will go into defensive mode. They will be on the red line. You'll be talking, and their mind will be saying, "You have no idea what it's like." Number 3, set clear expectations. One of the most frustrating things about receiving feedback about something that you may not have done or performed correctly is not even knowing in the first place. If you want to know more about this, listen to my episode on the comfort of clarity and especially the Mr. Burns Simpsons reference. The point is that in many cases, the manager thinks they're being clear and the other person is confused as to what's being asked and often scared to clarify for risk of being in further trouble. Setting clear expectations can come in many forms, including verbally through conversations, position descriptions, key performance indicators, high-value activities, goals, company values, processes and procedures, training and development, and more. It is imperative that the expectations are consistent and not in conflict with one another. Expectations should be discussed regularly and feedback provided on a frequent basis. It may sound like an obvious statement, but clear expectations need to be clear for the other person. I say this because of the inefficiency of language. When I say the words, "it's a long commute," what do you think of? If you're in Adelaide, you might think that's more than 30 minutes. In Melbourne, you might be saying, well, it's maybe more than an hour. In Sydney, an hour and a half. The word long in that sentence means different things in different contexts. Managers can often become frustrated because they're using language that makes perfect sense in their minds. They think that repeating the same words with more conviction helps to be better understood, which of course makes no sense. Now let's consider the behaviour of staff that makes no sense. When they said that they understood and they didn't. When they said they would get it done by that time but they didn't have open hell. When they keep avoiding a task because they are too afraid to say they can't do it. But I trained them 3 times. No, you just gave them the same presentation 3 times that went over their head. So what to do? Don't stop by just telling. Look for evidence that you're being clear, rather than thinking you have been. And this has to come in the form of what you're getting back, whether it's paraphrasing for the other party, their behaviours, or other actions that give you confidence. Observe their reaction, and don't simply ask if they've understood, because chances are they say yes, when they mean maybe. Number 4, no surprises. Give bite-sized pieces often. The biggest problem with the traditional annual performance review is the first word in that phrase, annual. It's no wonder that managers and employees alike both hate this review. It's a good thing that many companies have done away with only having one annual review, moving more towards more frequent performance discussions. Why? Because there are many issues associated with saving up feedback. First, the more you're stewing over it yourself, the more tense you become. Now, this is different to giving it a day or so to cool off if the situation made you angry. Waiting 1 to 2 days can be a good thing in that case. Waiting 1 to 2 months is not. The more tense you are about giving the feedback, the more it's going to come across that way and make the situation more uncomfortable for both of you. And the person receiving the feedback is not going to feel great to begin with. Second of all, the frustration of hearing about something from a long time ago when it could have been addressed earlier will make the other person focus on your behaviour more than theirs. At best, it will negatively impact your relationship and dilute your message. At worst, your message is completely lost. The third reason is obvious in that you can't make changes if you can't be made aware. This becomes a bigger issue if that concern is more serious, because you now have a lot less time for that person to change their ways. This will more likely lead to a hostile situation. We often see this occur close to probation time, when someone is given an ultimatum a week or a month before the date the probation is due to end. They feel panicked and rushed, and they're unlikely to shift their behaviour quickly. Now, the fourth reason is that you will create a psychologically unsafe environment. Receiving feedback about something you didn't do well out of the blue that appears to have been saved up over a period of time creates this nasty surprise. Then it creates the possibility that there will be future instances where there was something wrong that wasn't communicated. This uncertainty can move the person towards the red line when they're interacting with you. Now, this doesn't mean that you should let people know at the very moment they've done something wrong in every single case. There may exist good reason to not provide feedback straight away. However, it should be something that you don't procrastinate on or just sweep under the rug. The opportunities for ongoing feedback are many. You have your informal discussions, you have your weekly one-on-ones, you have your monthly one-to-ones, your quarterly reviews. If you have an annual review, it should simply be a reflection on the year and looking forward to the next year. The key to success is that there are no surprises at this conversation. The 12 tips for providing feedback is mostly focused on when you need to provide constructive feedback to help people to perform better. However, one of the most important parts of feedback is to let people know specifically what they're doing well, so that they can keep on doing it. It also gives people motivation towards their job and putting in more effort for the future. It builds stronger connection with you because they feel appreciated by you. They feel noticed and valued. And this positive feeling towards you can result in you feeling good about them too. So everyone benefits. It is important to be specific when providing recognition. And so if we do things like describing the behaviour and impact, that's very helpful. So rather than telling someone just that they're awesome, let them know what they did, which was awesome, and the impact that it had. For example, you've been engaging with customers and investing time and effort in learning what is important to them. For example, yesterday, when you asked the customer what was most important for them to achieve this quarter, it opened up the conversation into what was troubling them the most. We were then able to adapt our priorities to best support their upcoming objectives. You could see in their face and their tone of voice that we had brought them a sense of relief. That was very well done, and I want you to keep going with that. The important part of giving recognition along the way, that is catching people doing it right, is that it builds up this bank of goodwill with that person. And then if you need to provide them feedback with something they have not done so well, then they are more ready to receive it. They feel that it's coming from the right place and it's balanced with all the positives. Think of it as giving 9 points of positive feedback for every 1 point of negative feedback. Now, the mistake that some managers make is to not give recognition in an ongoing way. And then when they need to provide feedback on something that needs to improve, they suddenly bring out the positive feedback as a way to soften the blow. However, the experience of receiving positive feedback only as an introduction to negative feedback results in the other person's spidey senses tingling that something bad is about to happen. Now, you can get past this if you're consistent, but don't be surprised if it's awkward to begin with. One other thing to really frustrate those of you who don't enjoy the complexity of human beings, sometimes your recognition can be taken poorly. Well, why should I do if it can be taken poorly? I mean, why do anything unless it's guaranteed to be successful? So yes, some things can go wrong. But this is how it can happen. So this is what to avoid. The situation where it can be taken poorly is if your recognition is about things that are trivial or not reflective of what's important. How the other person views themselves is important to know. So noticing what they have been focused on achieving, what they've been motivated to learn and develop is important. Ignoring that and then giving praise about something that means very little to them can be worse than not saying anything at all, because you're demonstrating that you've not noticed the important thing. For example, I love those pens that you picked up from the office. They write so well, great job. And you've ignored the fact that as a customer service manager, we just achieved an amazing Net Promoter Score through hiring the right people, training people, and really building up the team. So make sure your recognition is proportionate to what the person values and what's important to them and to the business. Number 6, feedback on improving. Avoid a cathartic experience for yourself, otherwise the message is lost. There is a scenario that I've seen happen in executive and senior management meetings that makes zero sense, yet a bunch of seemingly very intelligent people have no idea it's the case. Now, the situation is when something is not right in the business. Maybe the team is not following the right process effectively, or not respecting policy, or they're way behind on a project. Whatever the case may be, it's caused a level of frustration at the top table. And this is understandable, of course. And at that moment, the executive who is most accountable for those people agrees, hey, we'll let that person underperforming know in no uncertain terms the behaviour is not acceptable. The others agree, and this is the right thing to do. At the next meeting, the executive asks for an update. They proudly report that if they didn't know it was not acceptable before, they certainly know now. I've dealt with it. They slap each other on the backs, and soon they're really happy that they've held them accountable. That's what we do. Now, the actual effect of the executive's stern words, they last long enough just until the next time, and this person does the exact same thing as before, because the core problem's not been solved. The cycle continues, and that develop this view that people need to be told or else they won't do what is expected of them. We often think that we're giving someone feedback to help them improve, but many times we're actually just getting something off our chests. It's a cathartic experience. We feel better having said what we needed to say. The problem is that we think that we've achieved something, when in many cases, if not communicated effectively, all we achieve is a temporary change in behaviour that is mainly motivated to avoid being told off again. Their main goal is to avoid you scolding them rather than achieving any sustained change in behaviour. Have a think about the difference between the two and what that does to a leader's perception of people. When people feel they are being told off, they focus mainly on the experience of being told off. Their mind is thinking, they seem to be talking a lot. How can I best get out of here? What do I need to say to make this stop? Just say yes to whatever they say. What do I need to avoid this experience happening again? This is the person stuck on the red line, not being willing or able to make a sustained change. So ask yourself next time you're giving feedback, are you doing so to get it off your chest and now it's with the other person to deal with it? Or are you providing feedback to help that person change their behaviour? The best thing to do is to take a step back, go for a walk, write it down, reflect on how you might come across, and then align your thoughts and emotions before providing that feedback. Number 7, behaviour, impact, next time, benefit. BINB. Be specific, straight, and instructional. Like when providing recognition, giving constructive feedback needs to be specific. The other person needs to know what was observed, the impact that it had, and what they can do differently. Yes, there is merit in people coming to their own conclusions and conducting a coaching conversation, as I will describe later on in this episode, and this can often be a great way to do so. However, sometimes given specifics as to how the other person can be more effective next time can provide them clarity and confidence to apply the right technique. Important note, you've got to have an upbeat disposition when applying BINB. If you're coming across as too serious or tense, the other person will feel this. For them to take on board the feedback in the right way, they need to have confidence to feel safe. So if you come across positively and display confidence in their abilities to apply the feedback, they'll feel better and in turn be more likely to have a go at what you're suggesting. Let me give an example of BINB in action. Behaviour. What I've noticed is that you've been commencing work on the same day that the deadline is due. Impact. Whilst this may work on some occasions, when there is a need to gain additional information from others, your request to those people only allows them a few hours in which to respond to you. The result is that your submission can contain incomplete information that will be beneficial to be included. Now, you may wish to pause and or ask a question before moving to the next time of benefit. In particular, you could ask if they have noticed this happening themselves, so that you can be on the same page regarding what is taking place before moving on to the solution. Next time, I know that when we receive the brief, there may be other meetings booked right afterwards. What I find helps is to schedule in 30 minutes first thing the next morning to review what I need from others and let them know right away. Benefit. This makes it easier to hold people accountable for responding as the amount of time is reasonable. It also means that you don't need to field questions about why the information isn't up to date. Here's a tip. If you use the if, then, statements, then this can also be useful when applying BINB. This is a simple structure to use at the appropriate time. It's important to know that this method works in a number of situations, but should not be the only method you use. If the person is reasonably experienced on the task, you may need to take on more of a coaching approach to help them come to their own conclusions. That is, you can still use this method with an experienced person who is new to a particular task or function. If you feel that you've explained this already though, then don't just repeat yourself. Find a new way to get through to them. Number 8, focus on what you need people to do and use examples to support it. Some people say that a child needs to learn that a stove is hot by burning their hand. I'm not so sure this is necessary, but what I do know for sure, if the child is burning their hand over and over, that's definitely not a good thing. Specific examples are useful to help the other person understand what is taking place. However, if you are adhering to the no surprises approach, therefore aren't saving up a long list of feedback to talk about, you shouldn't have many examples to go through. If you're approaching the conversation as a way to help the other person, rather than getting something off your chest, you won't need to go through your long list of examples. So rather than overwhelming someone with a shopping list of examples that can feel demoralizing, focus first on the overall message or outcome you want. Use a small number of relevant examples to support that message, not prosecute the person. You don't need to list everything to get your point across. So the first example is ineffective. It's list heavy and corrective. So the manager says, I need to talk to you about the discounts you've been applying. I've noticed you submitted 6 discount requests this week. Let me go through them. ABC Limited, you asked for a 10% discount. XYZ Limited, 15%. Baxter, 20%. And they're a small customer we've only just started working with. Jones, another 10%. Langford, 10%. Whitehorse, 15%. Now let me explain why each of these customers shouldn't be getting a discount. So the outcome from that is employers likely to feel defensive, scrutinized, and overwhelmed. The volume of examples shifts the conversation from improvement to justification, and learning is reduced. This is a defensive red line conversation. Now let's go to another example, which is a bit more curious and developmental. So the manager says, I'd like to work with you on negotiating better outcomes with customers. The employee says, okay, tell me more. The manager says, I know it can be tough when customers present a compelling reason for a discount. They often sound very convincing. Do you feel like you're put on the spot when that happens? Employee, yeah, definitely. A lot of them ask for it. It feels like at least half. Manager, at least half? That feels higher than what we've seen previously. Do you have a sense of what might be driving that? Employee, I'm not sure. It just feels that way. Are my discounts too high? Manager, there has been an increase over the last couple of weeks, which is why I wanted to talk. What I'm more interested in is how those conversations are playing out for you. Employee, do you think I'm giving discounts to customers I shouldn't be? Manager, in most cases it's not clear-cut. There was one recently with ABC Limited where the discount was agreed to a bit too quickly. That might just be one example, but it made me curious. What was going on for you in that moment? Employee, it was pretty intimidating. I didn't really know how to push back without damaging the relationship. Manager, that's understandable. Some customers have a strong presence. I found that once you get past the initial energy, it's actually quite collaborative. I also know that you care about maintaining positive relationships and you want customers to see you as a valued partner, not just someone who negotiates on price. I think we can build your confidence in handling those moments so you can do both. How would you feel about us working together on a few techniques that I've found helpful when customers ask for discounts? Employee, yeah, I'd like that. So the outcome from that second example is the employee feels supported, understands the issue, and is engaged in improving capability rather than defending past decisions. The tone and approach with the second version is more focused on the message and improvement. The example used in the second version helps the person to understand, whereas examples in the first version are there to drive home the point. It might feel better temporarily, but the result is that the recipient will be more focused on how bad you made them feel than what they need to do differently. Therefore, the point will be lost and the relationship will be worse. Number 9, debrief versus brief. Timing is important. There are only so many things that can be debriefed. It's important to make the right judgment call on how much there is to go through in a debrief. Sometimes, if your conversation is like beating a dead horse, you need to stop. It's not helping anyway. But what about that thing that you haven't covered? How will this be addressed in future? I need to get this off my chest. If you're going to be leading and managing people, you need to be organized. You also need to be locked in mentally to helping them develop. Getting something off your chest just so you feel like you've done your job and that task is done. We've already established that's not effective in the earlier section. Sometimes rather than letting the person know what they did straight afterwards, you can work with them on what they can do right just before they approach it next time. This is not the same as saving up some negative feedback. It is helping the other person to have a positive recent experience of doing it right. I know when you're about to start a document, you enjoy writing down your thoughts on a blank sheet of paper, and you can still achieve that with what you're about to do. One thing that you can do to help you write more is to create sections. A format that can be helpful is to have background, overarching message, the 3 things that make the message true, and then the conclusion. If you create these titles and then write freely within each section, you can ensure to cover off what is most important. In this scenario, rather than telling the person what they should have done when it's too late to change anything, we'll let them know how to approach things differently just before they have a chance to do it. They are far more likely to apply it as it is fresh in their mind, and they have less of a negative connotation as it's about the future rather than the past. Number 10, draw their own conclusions with coaching. Asking great open questions with a paraphrase or with a preface, this is a very powerful technique and is often not used by managers because they've not practiced coaching. When in a rush, the easiest thing to do is just to tell people rather than to coach them. This ingrains the behaviour of telling rather than coaching, and the cycle continues. When giving people the answers, the person receiving the information is doing less work. The brain is not working very hard. However, this also means they're not taking in as much. Coaching is about creating a safe learning environment with the other person, whereby you can ask them questions to help them gain clarity on the way forward. Coaching is a topic that is too big to cover today sufficiently, and we'll delve into that in future episodes. But it's an important part of feedback. What's important to know is that coaching doesn't mean that saying to your team, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions, which is a cliche that a lot of managers say to their teams out of frustration because they feel like they're the only one with the answers. The problem with this is that besides it coming across as a little bit aggressive, is your team is being told, don't come to you with problems unless they have solutions, which if they don't come to you with those problems at all, that may not end very well. Let's break down some of the techniques that can really help. Let's start with a preface. In the words of South Park's famous Eric Cartman, who said, appetizers are what you eat before you eat to make you more hungry, a preface is similar in that it's what you say before you ask a question to make the question more easily digestible. Without a preface, a question can come across in an interrogating way. There is no context, and so the other person makes up their own context. And because we don't like uncertainty, the context we make up in our minds tends to be towards the negative. I would like to know more about how well our processes are functioning. I know that sometimes there can be situations where it is not appropriate to follow the process exactly, so I'd like to understand more about the situations when you felt it wasn't right to follow the process, what led to you doing so, and would it be okay with talking through some of those scenarios versus why don't you always follow the process? The next technique are open questions. Now, closed questions are questions that result in a one-word answer. Open questions are incredibly powerful. They are the key to achieving many positive results with your people. Open questions help your employee to think through a problem or situation themselves, therefore assisting them to take accountability for action. They demonstrate collaboration, therefore building a more positive relationship with your people. Some examples are, what does success look like for you? How would you like to verify that information? What options are of interest to you? Here's a tip. Try to avoid asking why when it is a heightened emotional situation. People tend to go into defensive mode, that is red line, when asked why. A better way is to use words like what. So if you say, why did you do that? Versus what led you to that decision. Paraphrasing is the next tool. Paraphrasing is when you summarize what the other person has said in your own words. It is a very powerful communication tool, one of the most powerful available. The benefits of paraphrasing are immense. It demonstrates to the other person that you've been listening. It allows them to correct anything that you may have got wrong. It ingrains in your own mind what you've just heard, and perhaps most importantly, it buys you time. Now, on this last point, this can mean the difference between you saying something effective with the next thing or just blurting out whatever comes out your mouth and potentially saying something destructive. A paraphrase is similar to a preface in that it's a great way to transition into another open question. It's the question on the question that gets to the heart of what's taking place. The preface and the paraphrase are enablers to help you get there. Number 11, the power of stories and visual aids. We remember visually and in networks. One of the things that is important to do as a leader is to communicate the same message in different ways. It's no different with your team. Do you know what the difference is between effective repetition and nagging? Effective repetition feels good for the other party. It helps them to join the dots in their mind and what the learning really is. Nagging's tiring because there is a level of frustration coming from the person delivering the message, and it's done in the exact same way. Think about the clever marketing campaigns that you've remembered, or maybe a short film that had an impact on you. Consider how you can apply this to giving feedback. What are the stories that you have from your own experience or the experience of others that are worth sharing? What is the overarching message that this story conveys? What was the struggle? And how is this relevant to the audience? How can you best communicate this story to have maximum impact? E.g., what detail is important and what is irrelevant? How can you create visuals in people's minds? We were sitting across from each other, just like how you and I are right now. Some people are not confident with telling stories, therefore they avoid them. And this approach misses out on a very powerful tool to help people remember the message and cut through the noise of the other pieces of information that they need to contend with. Number 12, the same side of the table conversation. You are not the problem is the problem. I've conducted many workshops on the topic of feedback, and the same side of the table concept is always the most popular. And so I've saved the best for last. If you can master this one, then you'll be well on your way to being able to provide constructive feedback in a much more effective way. The first thing to know is that this doesn't necessarily mean you have to sit on the same side of the table. It's not as easy as that, although it sometimes helps to not have a barrier between the two of you. It is less important than how you actually give the feedback. An opposite side of the table conversation goes like this. You've been making quite a number of mistakes recently. This is causing frustration for our customers and for the team overall, as they are needing to pick up on your mistakes. I want to help you get better because it is important that you deliver accurate work so that our customers trust us. A same side of the table conversation goes like this. I noticed that you received a few challenging pieces of feedback lately with some errors with customers. I imagine this will be disappointing for you because I know you've been wanting to win over their trust and confidence in you. I would like to work with you and help figure out how best to reduce or even eliminate this taking place. It could be that we need to review how the process works. Maybe there is something I can do differently, or there might be some techniques that can help you with around accuracy. Would that be helpful if we did that? What do you notice? In the first example, the problem is with the employee. They are the ones who need to improve. And all that really matters is that the customers are impacted. In the second example, there is acknowledgement that the cause could be due to any number of factors and that the two people will work through it together. The focus is on what the employee is wanting to achieve. It is looking through their lens, and you're also showing empathy. You're seeking to understand. Here is the full list for the 12 tips for providing feedback. Number 1, be credible. Who is this feedback coming from? 2, empathy. Seek first to understand. 3, set clear expectations. 4, no surprises, give bite-sized pieces often. 5, recognition. Build up a bank of goodwill. 6, feedback on improving. Avoid a cathartic experience for yourself, otherwise the message is lost. 7, behaviour, impact, next time, benefit, B.I.M.B. Be straight, specific and instructional. 8, focus on what you need people to do and use examples to support it. 9, debrief versus brief. Timing is important. 10, draw their own conclusion with coaching. Ask great questions with paraphrase and preface. 11, the power of stories and visual aids. We remember visually and in networks. 12, the same side of the table conversation. You are not the problem is the problem. So in conclusion, the most common challenge and question I hear from new leaders and managers is how to give staff feedback in the right way, with good reason. It's important to know that experienced managers don't have it all figured out either. In fact, even for those of us who might be considered highly skilled in the area, will not be perfect every time. The ability to provide feedback effectively with your team requires the right motivation, technique, and emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is not a destination. It is fluid, and that sometimes you're displaying it and sometimes not. So keep working on giving feedback effectively. Practice, reflect, observe, and most importantly, never stop learning and never stop trying to get better. If you do that, chances are you'll be one of the better leaders and your team will be more open to hearing anything you have to say. Leadership doesn't grow by accident. It grows because you choose to work on it. Thanks for making the time today. I'm Tommy Sim, and this is Lead to Grow. If you found this episode helpful, feel free to share it with someone who might also get value from it. If you're watching on YouTube, you can like the video and subscribe to the channel to see future episodes. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can follow the show. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, a 5-star rating or short review really helps more people discover it. New episodes come out regularly. Hope to see you again.